How's it going, Giddy? It's great to get you on the podcast. We've been working on getting this thing going for a while, and I'm actually really excited to hear about your background today and dive into the problem that you're solving because actually the problem that you're solving is pretty relevant to some of the work that I'm encountering right now, which is just a huge ocean of a problem I'm finding out.
Can imagine. So first of all, Joe, thanks for having me here. It's my pleasure. Yeah, looking forward to a great discussion now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we start with telling your background? How you got into IT, how you got into security, what made you want to go down that path? Was it something that interested you? What does that look like?
Yes, I would say it started actually when I was in high school. Actually, I would say that I always loved programming, math, solving complex problems. I started to deal with cryptology almost like as a hobby. And a couple of years after that, I joined the Israeli military, right? Like every Israeli, and joined the 8200 unit, right? Like the Israeli NSA. And it happened to be, which I didn't know when I joined it, actually, when I was recruited, but actually go to the same place I like to deal with the same problems as I was a kid, right? On the cryptology side. Served there for X amount of years and then kind of moved on to the industry. But I would say that was kind of like cemented my love for data analytics, complex algorithmic problems, and of course, dealing with the cybersecurity, which was not the terminology used then. It evolved along the way, but the cybersecurity type of problems and finding the right solutions for them. So always loved it, as I said, since I was a kid.
So talk to me about the crypto side in 8200 group, right? I've had on a lot of 8200 group people, and I know you can't tell me any specifics or anything like that, obviously. I don't want you to, don't tell me anything you can't, right? But what is that like for crypto? Can you talk to me a little bit about like just what that looked like? Were you creating crypto algorithms? Were you deploying it in, harsh environments, or just what is that?
Yeah, so as you said, I cannot share much, but I can tell you that we dealt with code cracking at the end of the day, right? Like similar to what the NSA does, right? So at the end of the day, right, there's encrypted communication of some sorts, and the job is to find systematic way at scale, right, to crack it. So that's what we were dealing with.
Hmm. Yeah,
Many years
it's
ago, I probably information is very, very outdated by now, but that's how my career started, actually.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because like you always think anything digital, like the NSA, the 8200 group, Russia, China, they could just break into it. You just kind of assume that as like an outsider, right? And then you read a story about how like the NSA and the CIA came together, created a company in Germany that was like creating these devices to sell to our adversaries that had a back door built into it, right? Because we couldn't find out how to break the crypto that like just everyone is using. Like it's not like necessarily that proprietary. Like it's out there. Everyone's using like AES 256 and stuff like that. So like to go to that extent, to go to that length, I mean, to me that's pretty extravagant, right? Like it kind of just shows you the difficulty that
It
they're
is.
they're facing.
Yeah. No, I agree. At the end of the day, right, NSA, CIA, 8200, GCHQ, and all of them are intelligence agencies, right? So they go a long way, right, to find the best sources of information, right? They can deal with whatever their country is sent them to do. So it's complex, it's tough. Many things are impossible, so not everything is possible to be done. But there is a lot of creativity, which I think that's one of the reasons, not just myself, right? As you know, there are a lot of Israeli founders coming from 8200 because it's kind of a unique place where on one end you are dealing with very complex problems. Many of them are not possible to solve or you don't know ahead of time whether will be ever solved on one end, which leads to a lot of creativity, a lot of opportunity, right, to experiment with technologies. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why there's so many startups that are starting for founders to actually serve there, because there's so much I would say it's training, it's experience in dealing with the uncertainty of technology and its ability to actually provide the end solution at the end of the day.
How often would you say you would be handed a problem that you would, come back and say like, yeah, we can't do X, Y, and Z. Like we have to go another route with it.
If you're talking about my service then, a lot. I mean, it was So I would say it's not about just getting to a dead end. It's more about taking projects that you don't have a clue if you'll ever be able to be successful with them at all, because you just don't know, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a while, months, years to figure that out.
How did you develop the skill set to actually figure that out? And I ask because, when people are getting started in cybersecurity, I always recommend that they start, on help desk, right? Because you get a lot of different experience on help desk. And one of those factors with help desk is you learn very quickly how to identify a problem that. How's it going, everyone? Before we continue on with this episode is sponsored by Bonfy AI, as you probably guessed. But as always, that doesn't mean that they told me what to say or anything like that. They simply believe in the podcast, they believe in the product that I'm putting together, that I'm putting out, and they wanted to support the podcast. So Giddy came on, and all of the questions are unscripted as always, and they have a fantastic product that I think will help a whole lot of companies out there, because I know firsthand how big of an issue data security and data governance can be for companies. So with that, please enjoy the episode. This was a fantastic conversation, and please check out Bonfire AI down in the links in the description of this episode on whatever platform you find it on. Thanks, everyone. We can't do X, Y, and Z. Like we have to go another route with it.
If you're talking about my service then,
Yeah.
a lot. I mean, I would say it's not about just getting to a dead end. It's more about taking projects that you don't have a clue if you'll ever be able to be successful with them at all,
Hmm.
because you just don't know, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a while, months, years to figure that out.
How did you develop the skill set to actually figure that out? And I ask because, when people are getting started in cybersecurity, I always recommend that they start, on help desk, right? Because you get a lot of different experience on help desk.
Yeah.
And one of those factors with help desk is you learn very quickly how to identify a problem that you're not able to solve, that someone else probably on your team can solve, or, you have to go to Google for it or whatever it might be, right? But you learn immediately, I don't know this. I haven't encountered it. I haven't seen it. I don't know what it is, right? And that's a really critical point, because you're using your time and resources efficiently, which is what you need in a help desk environment, to turn over these problems as quickly as possible, really, no matter what the environment is, right? How long did it take you to be able to develop that kind of skill? And then what tools did you implement to kind of like factor it in to be like, okay, this is definitively something I can't do, right? Like, does that make sense?
Yes, but I would say that there's a lot of difference between, right, the upbringing, as you said, right, of security professional or security analysts are starting with the help desk and actually learning it from the ground up. A lot of what you need to do is to supplement it with research, right? So a lot of the ways to handle the unknown is research of different sorts, right? That when you're developing new techniques, new concepts, new ideas, and some of them almost by definition are not the one they're going to work at the end. So I would say it's a mix of a lot of different one skills, but also an environment that actually supports you in actually doing something and spending months sometime on it without knowing whether you're taking the right approach or whether the problem is solvable at all. Which again, it's part of just the rolling forward my, let's say, career in the high tech or startups. I think it was a great background of how to tackle complex problems that they're not clear, they're solvable or not solvable in a practical way. And why, if you do solve them, you create a big technological moat, right? To solve some big problems to a lot of organizations, and it's super exciting. But in many cases, it's just not clear upfront, despite the experience and despite the maybe supporting environmental resources where you'll get to the right solution. But that's part of what excites me. It's part of just dealing with the unknown.
Hmm. Yeah. It kind of gives you a bit of a rush, when
It
when
does.
you're going into something that's unknown.
It does.
Yeah, I'm getting my PhD right now, and not that my field is completely unknown, but there isn't a whole lot of material out there, on what I'm trying to research. And I'm kind of pulling three critical areas together and trying to find that overlap, that works, that meets the requirements and whatnot, which is something completely different from every other, level of study that we've been taught, like in all the way through even getting my master's degree, I was always taught like, hey, you have a paper, it's due on this date, it needs to be on this topic, whatever, right? You
Yeah,
have
it
a
was more task
project,
oriented. Yeah,
right? And now I'm creating the tasks. Like I'm figuring out the topic. I am then creating the tasks and creating goals for the end of each class of what I need to deliver. And the university is just letting me, do it. And it took me, man, it took me probably a semester, a full semester, maybe a semester and a half to actually figure that out because I'm just sitting here like, well, what do we do? Like I don't know how to figure any of this out. And then my chair finally like broke it down to me. He's like, you're the one that's deciding. You're researching. That's what researchers do.
exactly. Yes, I would say that going back to my early career, right, in the military service, that was a lot of what we did, right? So we had the high level missions, but what has to be done on a day to day basis, how to deal with them, what to develop, how to develop it, how to test it. It was a lot of freedom to operate, which again was a great learning experience for startups, right? Because many of them are starting that way, right? You have idea for something you want to solve. At least on my end, ideas that people did not solve before or problems that people did not solve before. You have some concept. You are trying to invent something from nothing and make it happen, turn it into a business. So I think it's very, very similar to that. That's why I said earlier, right, that I think that the analogy is better to actually to what you just mentioned, which is about research. It's a mix of research and practical problem solving and putting that together if you're looking on the startup in a business context. So multidimensional type of innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So where did you go after 8200 group? Where did you go to actually scratch that itch of
Yes,
researching kind of?
yeah. So I worked a few years just after my military service. It wasn't very long. It was about 5 years, so longer than the minimum, but not. It's not. I was not a military career person, right? So got out as a young captain, I think, if I remember correctly. It was a while back. Yeah, so I worked a few years in the industry, so in a kind of local high-tech company, but I always had the urge, right, to start my own startup since I was a kid, as I said, right? Started to work on developing a lot of code and just like, I just have to do that even before I knew the term startup, right? It was clear to me that's what I want to do. And that's when I started kind of to embark on it, right? So I had a startup in the what would be considered today as the open source intelligence space. Then started the Skybook Security, which I was CEO and ran for many, many years. Got a pretty nice size, sold it to private equity, stayed a bit more, and left it a few years ago. And my last gig, let's call it that way, is Bonfy AI, which I started in 24, along with my co-founder and CTO, Danny Keeper.
Hmm. So after the 8200 group and you go and work for a normal company, right? I'm trying to compare and contrast, right? Because in America, when like let's just assume someone from the NSA stops working at the NSA and they go work for a normal company and somehow, people there find out that they used to work for the NSA. Like that person's like gold. I mean like everything that that guy says or girl says is like gospel. I mean they can't do any wrong or anything. You would think that they like literally walk on water, but in Israel, I feel like that would be completely different because it's like, you walk into a place and you're like, yeah, I used to work for 8200 group. And they're like, oh, good. We have a whole hall
50
of
more like that, yeah.
150 people of you guys, like, is that's what,
Probably now more than when I started actually my career, because then a few things. One, I never said to anyone, not family, not wife, no one knew where I served actually. After my service, I'm not talking about during my service. So now that I'm kind of openly saying I dealt with code cracking, it took me probably 20 years even to say the words. Well, no one knew actually, I said kind of intelligence core and that's it. So no one knew exactly where I served. And I think that the units there were smaller. They were not small, but smaller than let's say developed over the last 20 plus years. So it was popular to be, to see kind of, let's say, veterans that came from those units, but not as many as you see today. And definitely the visibility to where you came from, what we did there was zero, right? We never talked about it.
And is that pretty typical? You said that you did like the minimum service amount. Is that pretty typical
It
for
was 3 plus 2, so it wasn't the minimum, but it wasn't very long, right? It was 5 years. Typically in Israel was depends on the year, was 2.5 to 3 years. That was the minimal service, at least for boys.
like do a lot of people typically go that route or I mean, I would assume so, right? Because there's probably only a select few that like stay in for multiple,
So there are a lot that are
contracts.
taking, so let's say another year, 2, 3 extension to that, like I did, right? Especially, intelligence corps, special forces, or Air Force, and alike. But I was actually I really enjoyed the service there, but I didn't want to stay a single moment more than that. Nothing bad there. It was a lot of fun. We did it with a lot of great projects and a lot of opportunities, right, to develop there. But I was just at the urge, right, to go to the industry, right, to develop products and start my own companies. So after 5 years, I said, okay, it was a great experience, but enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I could imagine myself going like one of two ways, right? Either I'm a career in the military, for like the entire career, or I'm in there, maybe one or two contracts, right? Learning as much as I possibly can and then moving on, right? And I feel like that would be pretty typical, especially for this industry and this skill set, like
Yeah,
just
I think it makes sense.
yeah, people in this industry, they need to constantly be learning and doing something new and everything else, It wouldn't be like them to stay in for so long. So afterwards, talk to me about how you identified the problem with, large data sets that you're currently working towards solving. Because and I'll tell you right now, right, I was on the call with a customer a couple weeks ago and they were talking about implementing Microsoft Purview for terabytes of data that they had. It was on prem, it was in the cloud and everything. And they told me that they were starting from literal zero. I didn't think it was literal zero. I figured you have to have something turned on.
Sure.
I get in their environment and it is
There's
it is
nothing.
literally
It's
zero.
true zero. Yeah.
There isn't even permissions to use the services, right? And I'm looking at it, and it's the first time I've ever looked at Purview. And, maybe an hour in, I immediately thought to myself, this isn't my specialty, like there's things that are on the fringe of my specialty that I can get into, I can learn relatively quickly and make progress and move forward, right? But this is like beyond that where it's like you don't just jump into the deep end with this thing. You kind of like you need some guidance, and just looking at it, I mean, it's a minimum 8-month project, right? Minimum. Like there's no going around it, right? So the
I agree.
problem is massive. And I didn't even realize that it was that big of a problem.
Yeah. No, it's a great point that you are making, and maybe let's generalize it a bit, and then we can get specifically to Microsoft Purview and the like, because I agree with you that there are eh, leaving a lot to hope for. Let's call it that way from data security perspective. But if you're looking on data security, right, it's one of the segments in the cybersecurity space that was the least served in my view over the last 15, 20 years, where there are hundreds of data security companies, hundreds of products, and I would say generally almost none help organization to address some basic needs. Where they have the sensitive data, to be able to detect and prevent the right type of leakage or misuse of information, to be able to quantify it from a risk perspective. They just say the world is lacking this capability. Now, when we start to think about doing working on Bonfy, right, stands for Bonafide AI, it was when Gen AI kind of started to take off. And we say, wow, there's a whole domain here, a data security domain that is completely unready for AI. And when we dug even more, we said, okay, it's unready for itself. I mean, data security solutions are just not a fit for the world predating Gen AI. There's the ability to classify and accurately analyze content, and the ability to have some single platform that it can be activated, let's call it that way, in a multi-channel way, in a consistent way, and it's at scale. They are not adaptive. They don't have context. They can actually analyze content with. They're just not a fit. And that's before Gen AI. And then we start to see kind of what's happening with the adoption of Gen AI, regardless of the adoption is I'm going to use Microsoft 365 Copilot, or I'm going to use ChatGPT, or I'm going to use some embedded Gen AI in some other custom application, or whatever it might be. The problems are the same and very similar to each other. Just solutions are not providing the visibility, accurate analysis, and therefore not any practical way to detect, prevent those type of risks. Data in motion, data at rest, data in use, super complex problem. And that's why we decided to start the company, right? Bonfy AI. We launched a few months ago already. We have customers in production and making our kind of inroads into the market. The more we get into it, we see exactly what you saw, John, that organizations that you would expect to have some controls, maybe not great, maybe initial implementation, maybe not the most sophisticated processes, have very, very little going. And I think that the reality is that they are using tools and methodologies that are completely outdated. I mean, the concept, for example, to be able to discover everything, classify everything, ask humans to review the classifications on terabyte of data doesn't make any sense. No one ever will finish those projects. It could take 8 months or 5 years. And by the time you finish them, probably the classification is already wrong because the context around understanding each piece of content, a document, an email, whatever it might be, is completely off. So that's one issue. Second issue, with the adoption of Gen AI, more and more of the content is generated and used on the fly. Think about, let's say I'm writing an email assisted by Gemini or Copilot by Microsoft or anything else. No, I'm not saving the email, letting some machine classify that, maybe a human will review it, and later on I'll do something. It's created and shared instantaneously. Think about a web use of, let's say, ChatGPT or like sites, regardless if they are internal applications or commercially available applications, etc. So the world is shifting from data at rest, data in motion. The world, even for data at rest, is adopted, and the vendors associated with that adopted methodology that do not make sense for organizations. They look very theoretical, like, of course, let's discover everything, we'll get great visibility, and with the visibility, now we can control. Really? Show me one organization that actually, after they scanned 50 or 100 terabytes, understood what's there and took any meaningful action item. Now, let's say, think about you're a bank and you are now scanning your 50 or 100 terabyte. And God knows you're going to find a lot of banking information in your S3 buckets and Azure data stores, etc. What will you do then with that? Of course, you're a bank and you are going to have a lot of banking information. What happens then? Probably not a lot, right? So the world is changing, right? Much more generated content, shifting from data in motion to data, from data at rest to data in motion, need actual visibility and risk mitigation, not just discovery. And a lot of the solutions, both old and new, just don't fit the mark there. And that's why we started Bonfy.
Hmm.
Make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because, I've been in the industry for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years at this point, right? I've spent a large amount of it in healthcare and financial industry. And I can't name a single time where, we knew, where the data was, we knew how it was classified, we knew, all the different tags with it, we knew the policies with it. We kind of bought these tools and, it was a multi-year project that just never seemed to end. Right. And yeah, I've never seen an environment be that knowledgeable about their data. Most of the time, what they do is they throw it into a file share, they throw it into a database, they encrypt it, put least privilege on it, really enforce it hard. And that's like it because I don't know how else to kind of scale with their data. Because like
Exactly.
you said, there's a manual process involved with these legacy technologies where you need someone that comes in and actually says, yeah, that's tagged right. That's classified right. Let's write this policy around it. And there's millions of pieces of data in just a few terabytes. Like it's not like an insane
Yeah,
size
it's
that we're even
manageable.
talking about,
Yeah,
like
I agree.
yeah, for modern computing, like it's a manageable size, but then you look at the actual data and it could be millions of pieces of data that you now have to classify somehow. And it's like, well, that person is going to do nothing else other than that.
Yeah, it will be wrong by the time it's done.
Yeah.
I would say it's almost inhumane to ask humans to classify. No, seriously, so much data. And all of that is without the use context, right? Part of the move from data at rest, data in motion is not just because of the generation, right? And use of Gen AI, of course, right? Technologies in web traffic, Copilot type of use, and a lot of other type of ChatGPT and the like. That's part of the issue. But the second issue is that To classify a piece of content without understanding the context of the business and the context being used is almost meaningless. Again, take the example I mentioned earlier. Maybe let's shift the example to healthcare. Let's say you want to find where you have PHI. You'll run discovery. After 8 months, you'll see that you have everywhere PHI. Okay, because that's what you are doing as a healthcare provider. So what would you do then with the information? So the fact you have sensitive data, it's not the issue, right? Every business has sensitive data. Otherwise, probably they should not exist if they have no propriety or not custodian of customer data, or they don't have their own proprietary information. Why they are there even? So the question is not whether there is sensitive data. The question is sensitive data leaking to the wrong place. Can it leak by the wrong sharing? So think about, let's take an example. Now let's get to the Purview and Copilot in Microsoft Word. Let's say I'm using now Copilot, getting assistant to write some document, which is great. It uses the Microsoft Graph to be exposed to everything I have access to, whether I should have it or not. Copilot is writing something nice, looks good to me, saying, great, let's save. I'm going to share it with a customer. Fine. Not only that, if I may leak by that a lot of sensitive data, let's say I kind of shared because I was a bit reckless. I opened the share for the entire folder on the entire SharePoint site and not just for this file specifically. Okay, let's say, because I want to make sure that the customer has kind of the right access. I didn't consider the fact maybe some colleague of mine or myself put some other customer data in the same place, which was relevant only for the other customers. Who would know that? So the point is that the risk is not the fact there is sensitive data. The fact that it's being shared mistakenly, maliciously, non-maliciously, recklessly or not with the wrong parties. Regardless if the sharing is opening a share, right? Like data at rest, opening, let's say, permissions for someone to get to it, or sending it over email or over chat, or taking a piece and putting it in some unsanctioned chat GPT site or like, that's a problem. And I think that's what the industry missed, right? Data security is not different from other disciplines security. It should be risk oriented. It should have context. Without that, so the problems will never be solved. My view, at least.
So you have an AI in the background that is doing what? And I'm asking that because you're a pretty young company, and from my limited knowledge of AI models, right? They get better over time because they're seeing more data, they're seeing more use cases and situations and whatnot. And so they're able to make more intelligent decisions over time. Did you find that to be a limitation, just being so young or early on, because you have to train the model to some extent more? Or how did you overcome that difficulty? Maybe it wasn't a
Great.
difficulty and I'm wrong.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. So not because of that, but coming to think about it, that actually we can answer that question as well. But the reason, what we did, or what we're doing, we developed technology that does self-learning of the business context. So we're doing it by, again, unique technology that can get to structured and semi-structured data sources in the organization, understand entities, basically create kind of big knowledge graph that helps us to identify entities in context and other techniques. But I would say that just let's focus on that for a second. It's basically an adaptive learning technology that we're using, which can learn extremely fast based on the customer environment. Of course, solely for them. We never take the data. We don't create models out of that, not for us and not for other customers. It's solely for the purpose of the specific customer of ours. So it's very fast. It can take hours to a day or two. Get the full business context. It's updated automatically, so it's adaptive to the changing landscape of customers, employees, groups, tags, whatever you have in the organization it provides the right context for the use of our solution there. So adaptive, fast learning, customer specific learning. So it has the business context of the customer. And that was our approach that makes our solution significantly more accurate on one hand, false positive wise, significantly less because it's all contextual, but at least as important, and I know a lot of organizations did not get to that, is that a lot of people are thinking about the false alarms is the biggest issue in data security, which true, it's a big issue, and we're doing significantly better job due to the context in showcasing or escalating only the right let's say alerts. But I think there's probably at least equal sized issue, if not bigger, which is the false negatives. Organizations, I think, is 80-90% of the data security incidents completely because they are not, because the solution today you cannot even express the type of things you need to protect against with those solutions. Not talking about whether they are accurate or not. Just impossible. Again, think about customer trust. Let's say you're a healthcare provider and you want to make sure in the way that because you have a lot of PHI, a lot of interaction with your patient members, let's say, you want to make sure that whatever you communicate with them is solely their data and now no one else, not because of some training of a model, not copy and paste, not hallucination, etc. How do you make sure? How do you even express yourself in a traditional or modern DLP and saying something like, make sure that if I'm sending information to this patient that does not contain information of another patient? Who'd know that? We do because of our technology. So the point is that we reduce a lot of false positives. We reduce significantly false negatives as well, right? The blind spots that every organization has in many of the data flows that they have.
It's interesting what you said. Probably 80 to 90% of the data issues or the data leaks, companies don't even know are taking place. Do you think,
And they cannot even detect them. That's my point. It's not they can
right,
try to use
they don't even have the
gravity control to the
capabilities,
fullest extent. It's impossible to detect them at all.
right? Do you think that if, let's assume, right, organizations are now able to detect 100% of it, do you think that like their breach disclosures would increase significantly?
It's a great question. Sure, if they have more breaches, they need to disclose them. But remember that part of what a solution like ours can do is to make them avoid a breach, right? Our solutions are not designed for detection only, though detection is a great starting point because it provides visibility that can result in better controls, better training, and a lot of avoidance of at least non-malicious acts at the minimum, right? So that's one. But a solution like ours, actually, you can use them for prevention or remediation. So you can actually avoid breaches altogether. So think about, again, the example I mentioned earlier, but let's now take a mail example, right? Let's say use some Gemini, ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot to help you write an email. Mistakenly or not, it contains sensitive data you should not have sent to whoever the receiver is. We can actually detect it real time, block it along the way, or work in detection mode as well. So we can actually support both detection, detect and respond type of apparatus, but also active prevention for serious, let's say, high risk situations. So the point is that risk can be mitigated. It's not just detected, but actually can be mitigated in multiple ways, both by using the right detection, visibility, which again result in secondary control, secondary action items like training, tighter access, and other stuff, and actually being in line or have a real-time remediation for actual prevention of risk as well.
Yeah, this is a whole world that I feel like people try to avoid, honestly.
I
Is that something
agree.
that you see as well?
Yeah, less and less. Think that organizations got, well, I know that I'm saying something which is probably not going to be too politically correct, but got comfortable in the lack of abilities of their data security tools because it is what it is, right? For compliance, we buy a tool, maybe we turn on some basic function. That's what you can do with it, and that's it, right? It's almost fine. That's what's available for us. We cannot do much more than that. But I think that's changing. I think what we are seeing, and we're seeing a lot of interest in what we do because of AI, not because it's only problems that they are resulting from AI adoption, but I think a lot of organizations feel very uncomfortable, or security professionals very uncomfortable in their seats with their lack of visibility, not talking about controls of their information flows or information systems. I think as an industry, right, the industry got used to protect the plumbing, not what goes through the pipes. And with the adoption of AI, everyone understands now what they need to do at the minimum. They understand visibility wise what's happening there so they can actually have a strategy of how to mitigate the risk. Now, we're seeing some organizations that are implementing DSPMs, right, as a way to feel better. Now let's discover all of our 100 terabytes and classify them. But as I said earlier, it's fine. There's usefulness, right, in getting high level visibility that now as a bank, you have 100 terabyte of banking information. Good job. But what do you do with that? How do you mitigate the risk of the bank or the healthcare provider or technology company or IP leakage? Can't, right? So I think that the awareness is growing very, very quickly, both for the old, let's call it old pre-Gen AI type of use cases, because people understand, yeah, maybe it's about time to do something about it because solution like ours, and I'm sure there will be other startups as well, make it possible to solve some of those issues that were never solved for properly. But definitely when you're looking on the AI use, regardless if it's a sanction application, like let's use Microsoft 365 Copilot, but make sure that you have some decent protection upstream and downstream where there is none. Okay, and when organizations are looking purview, sorry, they look at it and like you did in your story, and it's okay, great. Maybe someone else can do the job. So that's that. There's the unsanctioned applications, right? So basically, shadow AI. Someone needs to inspect that as well, right? Those information flows that potentially can lead to unsanctioned use of AI, right? Shadow AI, and also the custom applications. So there are so many moving parts that I think security professionals and organizations as a whole understand they just need to take the data security significantly more seriously. And good news, there are now good solutions that can actually address it in very different concepts. If you try to do the same thing that the industry have done over the last 20 years, it will lead to the same results, even if you're using some smarter LLM along the way to classify. It's just not good enough.
So for your solution, you said that it's learning the context of the business within the industry that they're in.
Yeah.
How long does that
Correct.
take?
It takes hours to a day, 2 days, and of course, continuous learning, etc. But you can have a great use of our product. It's designed for that. It's not a coincidence. You can imagine how to bring visibility and provide useful visibility and start tracking information and understanding what's there and what kind of phrase can potentially turning on some prevention can make it valuable for you in a couple of days.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And then just over time, it becomes more and more accurate and more, I guess, in tune with your business, right?
It
How do
does, but
you,
the accuracy is very high from the first moment you use it because we are using for grounding our entity awareness, the business context. We're using the customers' corporate data for their benefit. So we're not guessing. So for example, let's say we want to understand if you mix as a bank between one customer data to another, we know the customer base, right? That's how the system works. So we can identify it. And it's not kind of like something that in the first week will be 70% correct, maybe in 2 months, 85%. As long as we have the data and we digested the contextual data, it can be extremely accurate from almost day one.
hmm. So how do you ensure that you're getting all of the data? Because you also mentioned previously, there's all these different, I just view them as like different, I don't know, use cases or people or entities within the environment. Someone's using Copilot, someone's using ChatGPT, another person's using SharePoint to pull data from and to and whatnot. There's so many different like data origination points. How do you ensure that you have them all? Like, how does that even work?
No, it's a great question. So of course we cannot force anyone, right, to have all of the information flows or systems available to Bonfy. But let's discuss our side for that, and then how kind of practical implementation would look like. The platform, which you call Bonfy ACS, Adaptive Con Security Platform, is a multi-channel architecture data security, right, solution. So it's designed with one core content analysis engine that is using the business context and business logic to analyze and take actions as you define them, regardless of the source of data. It can be email, line, it can be file sharing for data at rest, it can be web traffic coming from your browser. It can work in the same way. It can work on different information flows with the same system, same logic. So you can apply, let's say, the same customer trust policy to different information channels. You don't need to do it 7 different times with different systems, etc. Now, when we are onboarding customers, of course, they don't start in day one with everything. Boiling the ocean is typically a great recipe for a failing project, right? So typically what happens, they are starting with one or two connectors, let's say to the most important systems. Between us, most of them start with Microsoft 365 or alike because 80-90% of the enterprises have it, and it has a lot of issues. Not blaming Microsoft or not, but because it's a core data store of so much information, collaboration tools, and emails, and all of that stuff. Naturally, it has a lot of sensitive data, and the controls around it typically are very rudimentary. Even if customers bought Purview, as we said, many of them have very little use. If you put on top of that Copilot adoption, it's out of control, and we're seeing a lot of organizations that are urgently looking for a solution like that. So many organizations start with that. They don't have to start with, let's say, connector to Microsoft 365, maybe yet another connector like Salesforce or another system that they wish. Start to get visibility, getting automatically entity risk scoring, which is a byproduct of what we do because we quantify the risk of every piece of data which is sent or shared. Then we can actually quantify the risk of the actors as well. So it can support inside the risk management program if they wish. The organization don't have to use it, but it comes out of the box as a byproduct of for what we do. Tune policies, right? We have out of the box policies for a lot of different topics like privacy, IP leakage, customer trust, toxicity, and many others. But they can tune them, turn them on, off, add their own policies. So tune them, start defining, watch it for a while, days, week, two, see what's there, and then start to define some automation rules like in what condition do we want to escalate to the SIEM, to a SOC, let's say via SIEM integration. When do we want to take active enforcement action because something looks like a mass PHI leakage that we're not going to take the risk and we just want to block this type of sharing, etc. So then you can turn it on along the way. And the second dimension is say, okay, great, now it works great. I trust it. I know how to use it as an organization. Let's connect it to more information flow, maybe web traffic via browser extension, maybe to other SaaS applications like ServiceNow or Jira or Salesforce or alike, where you have a lot of sensitive information with very little visibility as well. So it's typically gradual implementation once you get it going. Again, part of the benefit of having a multi-channel architecture, you have one policy plane, one business context, applies everywhere. So it saves a lot of effort and time for the organization on one end. Second, provides a lot of visibility for the actual risk. Think about when you have a user that, let's say, maliciously going to leave the company, sales rep, let's say, and you see suddenly some strange use of some based on web traffic, and you see some maybe sending some information to some unknown Gmail, and maybe often opening a file share with external party, maybe all of it together looks like some pattern I need to notice. So the fact, of course, the solution along the way will tap into multiple channels, can provide even better visibility for organization to address higher level risk, let's say.
That makes sense. So, as an end user, am I onboarding my domains into your platform and then activating all of the different integrations that, like all the different integration points that I have?
It's actually pretty simple. It depends, of course, on the information flow. But for SaaS applications like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce or Jira and all of them, we're just using their APIs. So very, very simple. It takes few minutes on the platform end. On our end, it takes a couple of minutes to put the, let's say, service keys and the like, and then it's working. Seriously, as simple as that. We have also an embedded SMTP server. So if people want to send emails via us, right, to use as a relay with all of the remediation actions, we can do it as well as an alternative with APIs. So we can actually support web traffic, custom applications. We actually are going to introduce soon an MCP server interface. So basically different interfaces that can use the same engine, regardless if it stems from machine human interaction with the world, let's say another system or another agent, using workspace like Microsoft or Google type of workspace type of solutions or SaaS applications. All of them can flow to the same engine for the same type of risk analysis. So pretty powerful.
Huh. Wow. I mean, legacy technologies, they're very rigid in this space. You know, like they're very rigid, not really working with, where the organization is, where they may have their data, 100%, right? And like all of the other legacy solutions that I've seen, it's kind of like, yeah, we can identify all of this stuff in SharePoint, but we're not going to be able to see, Copilot. We're not going to be able to see ChatGPT, right? Like all of this other stuff. And even the ability, like you mentioned, the ability to potentially even like build your own web interface for it, for like your internal team or whatever it might be. It's totally there and it's powered by your solution. I mean, that's incredibly powerful, incredibly useful to, I mean, big and small companies, but I feel like bigger companies would be using that feature a whole lot more because they're more around let's buy a product and then build it for the way that we use it and need it, right? And so you're turning your product into the engine for someone else's, web interface or whatnot.
Yeah,
That's huge.
yeah. No, we agree. That's exactly why we do that. That's why we believe that a vision is great, but needs to be translated to a real product, a real platform, which is designed to fulfill the vision. I think we're seeing the, even startups, right, in the DLP or DSPNs, right, spaces that are doing better with the old concepts, right? So taking the old concept and implementing them again with, let's say, better technology, better filtering, better architecture. But we believe that that won't solve anything. There's a just need to change the concepts of how data security is done because it's just too complex for organizations, right? To have some data access governance in just a nicer interface when you have millions of files doesn't change anything, right? Won't solve any problem, right? So the space has to be reinvented and reinvented in a way which provides both the visibility control along all of those channels that you just, like the example you just mentioned, custom applications, let's call it for example, with the same engine, without the need for the security teams to be expert in everything, which is part of the issue, right? Think about today, let's say large enterprise, how many different information systems or information flows they have, and each one of them might have its own data loss filtering capability. It's crazy. And then you expect the security team to be able to be expert in all of that stuff, consistent implementation of the policies they have, provide visibility for the insider risk or other entity risk in a holistic way. It's just impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's completely impossible, especially with the shrinking team size of
Yeah,
security.
true.
Organizations aren't spending on cybersecurity like they used to. And even the companies that had giant security teams that either I was a part of or I knew about, those teams are shrinking as well. And they're huge companies in the environment. Everyone would know their name if I said them, right? It's becoming completely unfeasible, especially with DLP and data protection overall. Like as soon as I looked at Purview, I mean, I was immediately, yeah, like you're going to spend 8 months on this thing minimum,
Yeah, it
and you're
turns me
not going to
off.
see any value until then.
Yeah. And again, the issue is that it's not the engineering side, right? Whether developers are good or not, right? It's not about that. And I'm sure they are good and talented, like in a lot of other companies. The issue that the concepts are just not feasible to implement between us, even in a small organization, not talking about large organizations, right? And that's if it's not feasible and you shove so much work on tight security teams, then it's not going to be used. Or it's going to be used to the minimum that the organization can actually spend time on, which is going to be way less than what's expected, even as a minimal control for any compliance requirement, not talking about AI governance or any common sense security apparatus.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Giddy, we're at the top of our time here, and I really enjoyed our conversation. This is a fantastic conversation, very, very educational, honestly, for myself, because this is an area of security, one of the very few that I haven't spent that much time with, right? And as soon as I like looked at it, I was like, oh my God, this is a giant issue. Like this is so much bigger than what I had assumed before going into it, right? And so it's really helpful to like kind of build in the context that we did.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for the time on that. And maybe just to reiterate the last point, like, all of the cybersecurity industry, right, practitioners, experts, everyone is used so much to focus on the plumbing, while the only thing between us, or almost the only thing they need to protect is actually the information, right? At the end of the day, that's why we exist, right? If there was no information in the systems, no security, you don't need a firewall, right? If everything is fine, right? You just don't need it. Okay. Or that's true for a lot of other type of solutions. So it's all about the information and the cybersecurity industry just missed the mark, right? The information is not well protected. And everyone is hoping that if the plumbing is going to be right and you put the right filters or the right routing or whatever, as the different pipes are connected to each other, maybe it will be good, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. Well, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience where they could find you if they wanted to connect with you and where they could find, your company if they wanted to learn more and figure out what they can do for their own environment.
Yes. So, yeah, it's super, super simple. Go to our website, www.bonfy.ai, and you can learn a lot about the company. You can raise your hand, fill the form. We'll be happy to contact, to talk to any one of you. Want to talk with me? Put it in the subject. I'll be happy to talk with you as well, personally. But I think the website is probably going to be the best place to look at. Also looked at LinkedIn, where we have the company page, which we provide a lot of useful information about. So either way works for us. We'd love to talk with anyone that has interest in the data security domain and especially in the context of AI adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Giddy. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, sure. Joe, thanks a lot for the time and having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you learned something about data security. I definitely did. There's a whole ocean of data out there that, needs to be secured that is a huge issue. So, if this is a problem in your environment, which it probably is, make sure that you go check out their website. Feel free to contact either of us. I'll put all of their links in the description of this episode. Thanks everyone.